In his fifth meditation, René Descartes presents his version of what's known as the ontological argument. Roughly put, the ontological argument is an a priori argument, which means it's based in pure reason and does not rely on empirical evidence. And the gist of it is this. God is perfect, therefore he exists, because if he didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect, but he is, so he does. And there are many versions of this ontological argument. The original, as far as we know, is from our good dead friend St. Anselm, who presents a pretty extensive version of this, but we'll look at René Descartes' version of it. And here's how his proof goes, condensed down a bit, and it's a reconstruction done by a philosopher named Lawhead, his last name, of course. So here's how the proof goes. First, I have the idea of a God that possesses all perfections. Second, existence is a kind of perfection. Third, if the God I am thinking of lacked existence, then he would not be perfect. Hence, if I can have the idea of a perfect God, I must conclude that existence is one of his essential properties. If existence is one of God's essential properties, he must exist. Conclusion, therefore, God exists. So there's quite a bit going on in this very short argument. The first is the notion of perfections. In this case, perfection means quality. So it doesn't mean, well, in the case of God, it's both a quality and, of course, totally perfect. This idea is that God has all qualities to perfection, all the good ones. And the assumption here, critical assumptions, are these. First, God, at least his conception of it, and that's why it's a priori. He just says his definition of God is a being that possesses all perfections. So it has all good qualities. The second critical assumption is that existence is a property. It's a quality that things have. Then, the way he reasons from this is, if he's thinking about God that has all qualities, and he lacked the quality of existence, then he wouldn't be perfect. He'd be missing something. But since he has this idea of a God that's perfect, then this God must exist, because otherwise he wouldn't have the quality and he wouldn't be God. And not only that, existence has to be an essential property of God. What that means is, in terms of being essential, is that God has to have it in order to be God. To use an analogy, a simple analogy, one of the essential properties of a triangle, the most essential, is being a three-sided figure. If it didn't have those three sides, it wouldn't be a triangle. And so he's trying to use a similar sort of reasoning. So God's got to be perfect. If he didn't exist, it wouldn't be perfect. So perfection has to be an essential property. He's got to have it. And of course, if existence is one of God's essential properties, that is a property that he's got to have, he must exist. Just like, to use the analogy, if we take having three sides to be essential to a triangle, which they are, because by definition triangles are the three-sided figure, then if there is a triangle, it must be three-sided. So God, on Descartes' view, must exist. Now, one of the things that people who use the ontological argument run into is clever people who try to say, we should be able to do the same thing to other stuff by calling these things perfect. In St. Anselm's case, he said, crudely put, that God is perfect, so he's got to exist, because if he didn't, exist, he wouldn't be perfect, but he is, so he does. A monk named Gonilo came along and said, hey, let's imagine a perfect island, and this would have to exist, because if it didn't exist, it wouldn't be perfect, but it is, so it does. And you could run that with anything. Just call everything perfect. The perfect toothbrush, the perfect kiwi, the fruit, the bird, the New Zealander. And you could prove the existence of perfect anything. Just pick anything you want, call it perfect, and it would exist. So one thing that Descartes has to do, which our good dead friend Anselm did as well, is try to show this only applies to God. So how does he do this? Well, he contends that this is unique to God. How so? Well, he contends that nothing else, be it an island, be it a kiwi, the fruit, the bird, or the New Zealander, has existence as part of its essence. So what's his reasoning? Well, aside from God, he claims, we can have an idea of a being without that being actually existing. So, to use a silly example, think of like a bilogon, a figure, I'm making this up, with a billion sides. Now, we have an idea, we can't really picture it because that'd be a lot of sides, but we have an idea. Billion-sided figure, okay, billion sides, have an idea of that. But does that actually exist? Well, we don't know. As far as you know, no one's ever made one because that would be pretty ridiculous. And there may be none of them in the entire universe. But we do have an idea of what it would be. Billion-sided figure. Okay, there we go. But it doesn't have to actually exist. Now, in the case of God, at least according to Descartes, since existence is part of God's perfection, it's a contradiction to deny his existence. The idea would be if you say God doesn't exist, you're saying God is not perfect, which is to say that the perfect being is not perfect, would be a contradiction. It would be like, going back to the example of a triangle, saying that triangles are not three-sided. That would be a contradiction. And this, of course, again, is to give credit where credit's due. This is a variation on our good dead friend St. Anselm's ontological argument, and he's generally considered the most famous dead philosopher to give this argument, in terms of sort of starting it up.